Tales Under a Broken Sky, Episode 23, The Witches of Killdanoe, Chapter 2. James Galvin is standing by the lakeside, watching the team of divers working to recover the body. The coffee in his hand, now cold and long forgotten, against the backdrop of the events that were rapidly unfolding in his small town. 1435, 3rd of August. James had taken the call himself the previous afternoon. The Murray boy, his voice broken and uncertain, saying something about the lake and the boat. James had struggled to make out what he was saying. The connection up there was dodgy at best, and the lad kept dropping in and out. Thinking back on it, he knew a lot of officers who would have just hung up on the lad, assuming a prank call. But he knew the kid, and his family. Maybe someone really was in trouble up there. It was unlikely. The lake was calm that time of year. But you could never know. James was trying to get Steve Murray to slow down when he heard the phone being whipped away and Sean Dineen's voice came over the line. Still broken and choppy, but much more composed than the other boy.
James, Sean Dineen here. Mark's lad. Look, we're up the lake doing a bit of fishing.
The kid's voice faltered. It was difficult to tell with the connection, but he sounded scared. James's heart sank in his chest. Years of experience and trained instinct told him something was wrong.
We were fishing, and our line got caught in something big when we freed it, me and Jake.
Another pause. James schooled himself to silence. The lad was talking. Let him talk. Whatever it was that had him shook, his butting in wasn't going to help matters.
We think we found Julia Burns.
Sean's words came out in a rush, as if he was afraid to hold them in. Something distasteful he needed to rid himself of as quickly as possible. Those words hammered into James's chest like machine gun fire, his heart rate increasing with every syllable. James knew the lad was still talking on the other end, but he didn't hear him anymore. A muted haze had fallen over him as Sean mentioned Julia. He knew what he should be doing, how he should be reacting, but it was like wading through mud. James had shaken his head and interrupted Sean, knowing that it was probably the wrong thing in the situation. The boy was scared, shaken by whatever it was they had found. He should have been more empathetic, given more support, but all he could see was Julia's face, bloated and rotten. Sean, listen, the connection's bad, but I'm going to be right up. I need you and whoever is there to stay put. I know you're scared right now, but if you can stay out on the lake until I get there, it will help me mark the location. Sean's voice cut across his again.
Yeah, no bother. Look, the other lads are in a bit of shock, but we'll muster through. Just get here quick, okay?
The pleading in the lad's voice was painful to hear. He knew Sean as well. There wasn't much that would force him to admit weakness. He'd had to force him off the football field once with a dislocated shoulder. Sean had wanted to pop it back in on the sideline and jump straight back into the game. James hung up and redirected the station phone to his personal mobile. Things were already tense in the town since Julia's disappearance, and he had the feeling they were about to get much worse. Sean had been right in the end, hadn't he? James had hoped he was wrong as he drove to the lake, hoped that they had just found the remains of an animal or something else under the water. He repeated it to himself over and over as he sped along the winding road, but when he'd waved them ashore, marking their distance in his memory for the diving team, he had seen for himself what they had recovered from the bottom of the lake. It had taken all of his experience to remain calm when he saw the piece of scalp, the tattered remnants of an ear still attached, and the earring, a small gold disc with a pink pearl inset just off-centre. That had been Julia's, a present from James and his wife the Christmas before she passed. He'd excused himself for a moment. using the call he needed to make to Tom as cover, and sat back into his car. As the month had dragged on, he had known the chances of finding her alive were worsening. But knowing the facts and statistics, none of that could have prepared him for the reality of experiencing it. James had put in the call to Tom, asked him to contact the forensics team in the city, and then gone back to garner what information he could from the boys. The news was going to hit the town hard when it broke. Nothing was going to be the same. Now, looking on as the drivers worked methodically, he shuddered. He had already ushered William Burns away from the lakeside twice, once the previous evening, and then again just an hour ago. The man had not taken the news well. He had fluttered between tears and anger when James had arrived at his house to tell him the news. Ordinarily, he would have held off saying anything, at least until he had retrieved the body, but there was no way those boys would have kept their mouths shut about what they had found. Better his friend heard the news from him than from a neighbour or overhearing it in the grocery store. James had told him to stay home. He would be in touch. But the man had shown up at the lake a few hours later, already half canned and demanding to see the remains. It had taken both himself and Tom to pull the man away from the small tent they had erected on the shoreline, and his deputy had driven the man home. When the man had arrived back earlier, driving Julia's car this time, he had still been inebriated and clearly hadn't slept. Tom had escorted him home again, this time with the threat of having his license suspended. 1556, 4th of August. James watched as the divers finished their work and started back to shore. It had been a long day. Someone in the regional newspaper had heard the news, and by lunchtime, reporters from the local, regional, and national newspapers had been trying to get onto the scene. He had given his usual statement, asked them to have some respect for the families, then booted them back across the perimeter, which his men had rushed to move another 100 yards down the road. Tom had arrived after lunch with the official statements from the 4 lads who had found the body. Nothing surprising in them. He'd gotten a pretty clear picture of what had happened the previous afternoon, and had pointedly not asked for too much detail about their fishing trip. Sean and Jake had grasped his meaning, and nodded in thanks as they left. James walked down to the shore as the boat pulled in, and the recovery team lifted the body bag onto the waiting gurney. He peered at the bottom of the boat as they wheeled the body away. He would have to deal with that later. After the time the body had spent in the water, he was going to have to figure out some way to convince William from wanting to see her. Hell, he was trying to figure out a way for himself not to have to view the body. A large evidence bag lay in the boat, a member of the team still sitting next to it, filling out paperwork and making sure everything was accounted for. James leaned forward to get a closer look. "We found that tied to her ankles, weighted her down. She was right at the bottom. It's no wonder we didn't find her until now." He started as the forensics technician spoke. James had forgotten they were even there. The jumbled pile of scrap metal inside the bag had caught his full attention. Fuck. He owned some of it. Had owned, he corrected himself. His eyes were locked on a large round piece of metal. It could have been a lot of things, but James knew exactly what it was. The weighted base for a garden parasol, specifically a branded parasol he had been given by one of the local pubs when he moved back home. It could have been one of many, but he knew different. A large chunk was taken from one side, where he had dropped it the year before his wife died. It had cracked one of the patio flagstones on the way down, and Lisa had never let him forget it. He'd gotten rid of it during a clean-out of his shed before the summer. William Burns had shown up with his trailer to take the junk away. He always had uses for old scraps of wood and metal in his furniture-making business. James froze and looked out across the lake. An idea was beginning to take shape in the back of his mind, ugly and twisted. It was a perversion of everything he had ever believed about his home and his friend. Fuck. Nothing would ever be the same again. 10:05, 6th of August. Hi, Sarah?
Hi, Maisie.
She trails off and the silence disturbs Maisie. There is something in the way her words just fade, as if she's being pulled away. Is everything all right? Her answer comes in the silence, which feels awkward, even over the phone. Maisie can almost see her friend's mouth opening and closing on the other end of the line, as if she wants to say something, but can't.
Maisie, it's Mom.
Maisie's heart sank. She knew that her friend's mother had been missing. She'd even talked to her about it a few times over the past month, but now the silence, and her difficulty speaking, spoke volumes. Sarah. Her words trail off. She simply didn't have the words, or the heart, to say what her friend couldn't. The line is silent for another 5, then 10, then 30 seconds. Maisie can hear the deep breathing on the other side.
They found Mom's body, Maisie. And...
Maisie's heart sinks. She is grateful that her friend would have a chance at closure, a chance to bury and say goodbye to her mother. But Sarah's words extinguished the last hopes that she might still be alive, and that pause at the end. Again, Maisie is more unsettled by the silence than her friend's words. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Is there anything? But she was cut off as Sarah interjected.
Maisie, they found her body. And they know who did it. It was my dad.
The world fades around Maisie as she stares blindly out her bedroom window. A flurry of wind strips russet leaves from the tree outside. There were no words, no possible response to what her friend had just told her. How, where could she even begin to offer comfort, sympathy? Pointless guilt gnaws at her chest. Maisie hadn't managed to make it home after she heard of Julia's disappearance. All she had been able to do was offer stilted platitudes over the phone, make promises she hadn't been able to keep. Sarah, I'm coming home. 2052, 6th of August. Maisie is lost in thought, staring out the window as the familiar terrain of her town rolls into view. It has been too long. That is all she was capable of thinking about on the long bus ride home. Sarah, her mother, the idyllic image she had of the place she grew up, now lying shattered in tragedy. Not long ago, she had looked forward to coming home, even if those chances were growing fewer and fewer with every passing month. This time, however, getting on the bus back in the city had been hard, almost impossible. Maisie had stood at the back of the line, feigning nonchalance as the queue moved slowly forward. But inside she was burning. Rage, anger, pain, sorrow, fear, reluctance. She had almost turned and gone back to her apartment to call Sarah and tell her something had come up and she couldn't make it. It shames her to think how close she had come to letting her friend down again. The bus rattles and shakes around her as it turns a corner and begins the final approach to the town. Maisie doesn't know what to expect. Murder. It was just something that didn't happen in Killdanoe. She mulls the thought over in her head. What would she find? Panic? Stunned silence? Fear? Maisie strains her neck to look ahead, the town centre just coming into view. Everything looks like home, but something feels wrong to her. She can see rows of cars parked ahead, but there are none on the road. The footpaths are empty. At this time, especially in late summer heat, she would have expected to see people outside, couples, families, people walking their dogs. but there is no one. The town feels empty, hollowed out, missing something important. The bus finally turns onto the town square, and Maisie sees what is happening. A crowd of people has gathered outside the police station. Men and women, a smattering of teenagers, but no one that she can see under the age of 16. As she steps off the bus, thanking the driver, he purses his lips and shakes his head sadly. Maisie understands the feeling. That's all she has as well. Stunned disbelief. Maisie has no interest in joining the crowd, whatever they are waiting for. She just wants to get home, see her family, and then see if Sarah is up for meeting. But as she turns to leave the square, a murmur runs through the crowd, and she turns to see what has happened. The door to the station swings open, and James Galvin emerges, followed closely by his deputy Tom. William Burns follows them out in handcuffs, flanked by two of the other officers, whose names Maisie can't recall. Maisie is shocked by the flood of anger rising in her. She knows that she shouldn't be. The man did a terrible thing, an unforgivable act. But the intensity is far higher than she expects. She clenches her teeth, and she can feel the muscles in her neck and jaw trembling from the effort. Even worse, she had expected him to look contrite when she saw him, but there was none of that in his demeanour. He walks through the doors with his head held high and surveys the crowd with a wry smile. It is not the man she remembers as her best friend's father. He had always been so loving and kind to his wife and child. Sarah had even remarked on that in one of their conversations after her mom disappeared. She was so proud of him for being strong when his world was falling apart. Then, all hell breaks loose. Mr. Burns is being led to the transfer van parked at the curb. Before he is eased inside, he lifts his head and in a loud, angry voice, so different to his usual soft manner, shouts over the murmurs of the crowd.
She was a witch, a fucking witch. She betrayed us all with her vile tricks and wicked sorcery. If you knew what I did, you would have done the same. What about your own?
His ranting is cut off as James Galvin reacts to the situation and shoves him roughly into the back of the van. The crowd stands in stunned silence. A ripple washes over them as the onlookers turn to look at each other, shock overriding their earlier anger. Maisie herself stands stunned by the side of the road. She doesn't understand what has just happened. She sees people in the crowd openly crying now, husbands, wives, partners and family placing arms around their shoulders to comfort them. The anger in his voice shook Maisie the most. She had expected denial, frustration, something, anything other than the unapologetic rage she had just witnessed. She scans the faces in the now broken crowd, looking to see if Sarah is among them. Her friend is broken by her mother's death as it is. Witnessing what she just saw, Maisie couldn't even begin to understand how someone could come back from that. Maisie watches, still in stunned horror, as the van drives away, and the crowd begins to slowly disperse. What is happening to my home? Welcome, folks, to episode 23 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I'm your host Keith, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. This week, we return to the small town of Killdanoe to take up where we left off with the last episode. Julia Burns is dead, and word is starting to spread. We are introduced to Maisie, Jake's sister, another one of the protagonists in this story, and after learning of Julia's death from Sarah, her close friend and Julia's daughter, decides to return home immediately to support her. At the end, we see Maisie witness William Burns being escorted from the town police station, and this is where the main plot of the story begins. He accuses his wife of witchcraft and proclaims to everyone that she got what she deserved. The crowd is shocked by his words, not because they necessarily believe his revelation, but because he is so different than the man they all know. It is a small town, and it is extremely difficult not to be familiar with, at least in passing, everyone who lives there, especially someone as widely known as William. His words here, and the anger that he expresses, are going to be the springboard from which the rest of this story will progress. I'm sure someone at some stage will yell at me over this, but I want to use this story to explore how anger and fear are used to spread prejudice and promote political agendas. Back in a past life, I spent a lot of time researching and exploring how identities of opposing sides in civil conflicts were often manipulated and distorted to achieve political goals, and it is a topic that I've wanted to explore further in a fictional setting. So yeah, politics. I think I'll leave it there for now. I don't want to spoil any further chapters, and I feel discussing it at this stage will probably provide too many signposts for how things are going to go down. So, until next time, Happy Christmas. Thank you for listening to episode 23 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I hope you enjoyed this week's production as much as I enjoyed writing and recording it. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing to the podcast on your platform of choice and sharing with your friends. This will really help the show and keep me motivated to produce more content. Thank you again for your time. Stay tuned to hear a brief trailer for the next episode.
Stay away. Oh, fuck, Stevenson. What if it hears me? What if it reaches me?
Tales Under a Broken Sky, Episode 24, Eternal Sunshine.